If you want to give us a little love, we are a 501c3 nonprofit science education and research organization, skeptic.com/donate. By the way, this latest issue is on crime and punishment. That's apropos of today's topic because my guest...
Yeah, did you...
I know.
Did you organize that?
No, that just came about. You hear my guest speaking now, Amanda Knox. She spent 8 years on trial and 4 years in an Italian prison for a crime she did not commit. And as a result, became a notorious tabloid story in the process. Here's what happened. Amanda, if you don't mind, I'll just get everybody up to speed, which is in your first book, which you were on for. In the fall of 2007, the 20-year-old college co-ed left Seattle to study abroad in Italy, but her life was shattered when her roommate, Meredith Kircher, was murdered in their apartment in Perugia, Italy, where a burglar named Rudy Gaudet broke into her cottage when no one was home. When Meredith returned, Gaudet raped and killed her, then fled the country. Amanda was not there. Gaudet left his fingerprints and footprints in her blood, and he left his DNA in and on her body. The MO of the break-in matched his previous burglaries, and he was known to carry a knife. He confessed to having been at the scene of the crime, and ultimately he was tried and convicted for the murder, sort of. Case closed. Well, not quite. An overzealous Italian prosecutor named Giuliani Mignini determined, based on nothing more than his vivid and at times perverted, I would say, imagination, along with some so-called evidence concocted by police after they illegally interrogated Amanda for endless hours without an attorney present, that Meredith's murder was actually the result of a sex game crime gone wrong by Amanda and her 1 week-long paramour, Raphael Solicito. Reinforced in his mind, that is, this Italian prosecutor named Giuliano Mignini, reinforced in his mind by the discovery that Amanda's nickname was Foxy Knoxy. Oh my God, that is convicting evidence right there. It rhymes. If the glove don't fit, you must acquit, Johnny Cochran famously said in the OJ trial, in which every single person watching knows he did it. But it was such a clever rhyming thing. How do you get past that? All right, we're going to talk about that. After the controversial trial, Amanda was convicted and imprisoned, and in 2011, an appeals court overturned the decision and vacated the murder charge. Free at last, she returned home to the United States, where she remained silent until she released the memoir of her ordeal, Waiting to be Heard. She was on this very podcast talking about that. Unfortunately, you just can't believe this story keeps going. After the publication of the book, she was tried and convicted again in an Italian court, only to see that conviction overturned again. How is this possible? Amanda cannot be tried again, thank God. But in the court of public opinion, she's been on trial since that fatal day in 2007. In the new book, here it is, free. All right, beautiful book, beautiful design cover, by the way, Amanda. Your publishers.
Yeah, I can't take credit for that. They're excellent publishers. I did say that I wanted something along the lines of kintsugi because I talk about kintsugi in the
I love
book.
the gold and blue highlights there. My Search for Meaning, nice back jacket cover there. Beautiful, in which she recounts how she survived prison, the mistakes she made, the misadventures she had reintegrating in society, and culminates in the untold story of her return to Italy and the extraordinary relationship she built with the man who sent her to prison. Really, Amanda, if I was your father, I would have not allowed you to go back to meet with this guy.
Fair point. We can talk about that.
I would have locked you in the garage. Anyway.
Oh, yeah. The perfect thing to do after I've been locked in prison.
I would have done it. Today, she's an author, lecturer, and co-host with her partner, Christopher Robinson, of the podcast Labyrinth. You can see it right there. Behind her, she has since become an advocate for criminal justice reform. Boy, do we need that. And media ethics. Oh, do you think we need some of that? Maybe. Her writing has appeared in the Atlantic, Time Magazine, the Los Angeles Times, and even Skeptic Magazine. She sits on the board of the Innocence Center and serves as an Innocence Network ambassador. All right, Amanda, great to see you. How about that?
That was a lot.
Well, I want to get everybody up to speed.
And I'm out.
Well, because it's hard to keep track of all the names bouncing around in your head, and there's, this guy, who did what, and all that stuff. All right, so let me just ask you. So the name of your new book is Free. You've been in my head. You're the reader of your book for the last 3 days. Are you?
Yeah, I would say I am. And I think that it really comes down to defining what does freedom mean. I think, as you know, this book is very different than my last book. It's not rehashing the trials. It's not about proving anything really to anyone. It's really the story about what happens after you have survived a traumatic event and how do you make sense of it all in the aftermath. And then therefore, what do you do about it? And I think that, clearly the term freedom for me is going to have a lot of weight. What does it mean to be free? I fought to be free. I spent my entire, adult life there for a good long second, proving my innocence so that I could be free, only to discover that the world that I was re-entering to as a technically free person was not the world that I had originally belonged to. I was still the girl accused of murder. I still had this traumatic experience that was now informing my life. How could I possibly be free if there's nothing I could ever possibly do to define myself more than this worst experience of my life? And I think it's taken me a long time to really figure out that I don't need to be vindicated and for everyone to recognize that I'm innocent and to have the world so that the fairy tale happy ending that we all think we should have in life, that to get the life that we should be living, to get what we deserve in order to be free. And I do today feel very free because I do not feel limited and trapped by the circumstances of my life. I feel very much empowered by them.
You write a lot about the stuff going on in your head, just walking around, let's say Seattle, and people recognizing you. And so what you're talking about here is being free of sitting there with the thought flooding. What are they thinking? Do they recognize me? Do they think I'm actually the killer and all that? You mean that kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's absolutely a part of it. Just the other day, we just had the Innocence Network conference here in Seattle. It was finally here in my hometown. And I was performing with the Exonerated band, which, if you've not heard us before, we are just a group of musical exonerees. Every single one of us people have been in crime or in prison for crimes we didn't commit. And I was getting ready for the performance, and my kids were going to come, and they're very young, so I wanted to get them ear protection. And I was running around Target looking for ear protection for my kids. And as I'm literally running around because I'm having to get ready for the show, somebody calls out, "Oh, you're Amanda." And I turn around and I just go, "Do I know you?" And he says, "I know you." And I'm just like, "Gah." And then I just continue on my way. It is this constant thing where I know as I go up about my life in the world, I am recognized, and I am recognized for the worst experience of my life. I have no idea, though, what that person has in mind when they say, "I know who you are." What version of me exists in your mind? What projection of me have you crafted, and do I then need to respond to? I think that's a huge challenge for me, is knowing that because this case was so public, so many people have their own ideas about it, and I have no idea what those are. So I feel like I'm very much on the spot a lot of times, and having to figure out, who do you think I am, and how does that reflect on just me running around trying to get a thing for my kid? How are you interpreting that right now, and the fact that I'm running away from you?
Yeah, I mean, your event was so public and lasted so long that even people that I would say, "Oh, I'm having Amanda on the podcast," and they're like, "Oh yeah, I kind of vaguely remember that." It just seemed like it went on, so there must have been something. I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Sure.
Come on, nothing.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a cognitive bias, right? Where you think that because there's a big thing, there must be a legitimate cause, when in fact, a very big thing can also result from a bunch of nothing that is all just clunked together. Or as my attorneys often said in court, 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 still equals 0. So if you just bring a bunch of unreliable or misinformed bullshit to the table, it's still not going to amount to something. But you're right. I think that because it became so public and lasted so long, people assume there's something to it. And I think a big part of that is because the thing to it was the narrative, right? There is a story that was crafted that really captured people's imagination. But what sort of objective truth was a part of that story, it was up for debate. And I think the thing that's really bothers me to this day is the fact that story really came down to this idea that women are incapable of true friendship. And there are certain kinds of women. There's the slut, and then there's the virgin. And the slut's going to be out there free-spirited, but also drug-addled and femme fatale. And then the virgin is going to be pure and virtuous, but also judgmental and uptight. And they're constantly going to find each other and be in conflict. And what else could result but a death orgy? Like, that was what captured the world's imagination. And it was an absolute fantasy.
Yeah, there's something about if there's a sex element to a crime that just, I don't know what it does. People just turns their brains into mush, like, oh, sex. And, oh, look, she's good looking too. That has to have something to do with it. And then, it's like, blah, they just lose all rationality.
Yeah, I mean, and what's really frustrating to me is it's not even, young women get sexually assaulted by men every single day, and many of them end up murdered. So what happened to Meredith was tragically not common. And I think the only reason why it rose to the level of attention that it did, unfortunately, was not because of what happened to Meredith, but what I was accused of. I was accused of a man's crime. And so the outrageousness of a young woman being capable of this kind of sexual assault was ultimately what captured the world's imagination. And the truth of what really happened to my roommate was lost. And you see that to this day in the fact that people often ask me who actually murdered my roommate. The international media never really focused on Rudy Gaudet, the man who actually did it, to the point that a lot of people don't know today that he is now on trial again for sexually assaulting another young woman. And because ultimately no one really cared about him and his crime, they cared about me being blamed for his crime.
Yeah, in conspiracy theories, there is this thing called the proportionality bias, where the bigger the event, the larger the cause you want to be behind it. So the assassination of JFK, well, Oswald did it. Oh, come on. Just some lone nut? It's got to be much bigger than that. Or, 9/11. You mean to tell me 19 guys with box cutters? Come on. We need something big, right? So the moment your case became famous and your face was plastered all over the place, he goes, well, it's this guy over here, this Rudy. Oh, come on. That's boring. We want this other thing over here that makes it much more, I don't know, balanced, proportional.
Right. Yeah, and I do think that it also goes back to what was going on in the minds of those detectives and the prosecutor in those early days. I to this day, I mean, you could read their own words. Like Giuliano Magnini wrote his own book and published it a few years ago, where he talks about how the minute he walked up to the crime scene, he knew that it was a conspiracy because he did not believe that the break-in was real. He just knew from the moment he walked up that it was someone in the house was involved in the crime, or someone who had access to the house was involved in the crime, because he did not believe that it was as simple as it appeared, that there was a break-in and there was a murder. And, to this day, when I talk to him about it, he maintains that position, that he cannot believe that the break-in was just a break-in. And I don't know if that's because he just made an assumption originally and now he's sort of defending that. He's like, on principle defending that, or if he really does believe it, that he just does not believe that a burglar would just break into the house and rape and murder my roommate. It seems unsensical to me because, again, that happens all the time. But from the very get-go, the police were focused, not just my prosecutor, but also the other police were really looking for explanations that were not apparent, like readily apparent in what the crime scene was revealing.
Yeah, another problem in conspiracism, but also just in a study of human behavior in general, just randomness and chance plays a much bigger role than we're used to. And also, people themselves may not know why they do things.
That's a great point, actually. I hadn't thought of that aspect of it very recently until now, but it was a random fluke that no one happened to be home that night except for Meredith, right? Like it was the first time that no one else was in the house because it was a holiday, right? And now that you mention it, like, I wonder if part of the reason why they initially came up with it had to be a conspiracy is because they couldn't accept that it was just random, that it's just a coincidence that night just so happened to be a night when nobody else was in the house. I think that's a really interesting point.
Those elements is to explain it, but also to predict it. Pretty much impossible to predict who the next school shooter is going to be. Which person is just going to snap the next day or that morning. They may not even know that morning, and then just something happens. They go, you know what? Today's the day. I'm gonna get revenge on those bullies or whatever. And so there's no way police or social scientists will ever be able to predict that sort of thing.
Right. We do not have access to all the information that we would need to understand the full cause and effect of the universe. People themselves may not have
access. I mean, this Rudy Gay, I mean, that he may have been surprised. Oh, look. Oh, whoa, wow. There's a woman here. Okay. Well, hey, while I'm here, I might as well, do whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to wonder what was going on in his mind, because I don't think that Rudy Gay intended that night to murder anyone, right? Like, he had never murdered anyone before. He had just broken into people's houses and made himself at home because he had this long history of being abused and neglected by his own parents, and went from foster home to foster home. But then what snapped in his mind in that moment that made him think, instead of just running away when I'm discovered, he then goes in and attacks. And I wonder if it was because Meredith might have been able to recognize him and then call the police. I don't know.
Or something. Yeah, maybe she tried to defend himself and then she panicked.
Right.
And something like that. I was just watching the latest OJ documentary on Netflix. They kind of rehash everything we already know, but there was one telling interview with his agent for the longest time, who finally, after the civil trial, dropped him as a client. And he said, we were out years later. OJ's in Florida playing golf or whatever, and they go out and have drinks. And he finally, OJ, did you do it? And he said, OJ looked at me and said, if Nicole had not come to the door with a knife, she'd still be alive today. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. This is according to the agent. So maybe what happened, we know he was stalking her and that he was super jealous and he was going over there to watch. And apparently he watched her having sex. I don't know if it was the guy he killed, but maybe somebody else, whatever. He was there. And so he probably got super jealous, pounded on the door or whatever. And she thought, oh God, here he comes again. I'm going to get a knife and defend myself.
I'm going to defend myself.
And then, he panics and like, oh my God, she's got a knife. And then boom, boom, boom.
Now yeah. Oh my God. Ugh.
Yeah. So he might not have intended to murder her that night. It might have just been, I'm just jealous and I can't control myself. I got to go over it. So yeah, I think a lot of it is like that. That's part of the problem of predicting these things. A couple other things I was thinking, reading your book here. Or you had a series of posts on Twitter. I'll read a few of these. But first, in my intro, I said they illegally interrogated you without an attorney. Is that the case in Italian law, that do they have a Miranda rights kind of thing?
They do. And what is very interesting about this case is they claim that I was never a suspect. So the police say that I was not entitled to an attorney because I was never considered a suspect. And I spontaneously became a suspect when I spontaneously confessed, is what they claim. Now, that is, I think, belied by the evidence. Very clearly they had their eyes on me. I was the only person. So I had other roommates. There were other people who lived in the house besides me and Meredith. And I was the only person whose phone was tapped. I was the only person who was being brought in repeatedly for questioning over 5 days, around 53 hours over 5 days. So it was very clear that the police had a very special fixation on me. What they communicated to me was that because I was young and I was also the foreigner, me and Meredith were the only foreigners who were living in the house, they assumed that I might have special knowledge about who might have a grudge against Meredith or who might have been targeting Meredith, or because I was the one who came home and first discovered that the house had been broken into and called the police, anything that I might remember about the layout or where things were placed might reveal something about who the actual murderer was. So they built me up to feel like I was really fundamental to their investigation as a witness. And to this day, they claim that I never was anything but a witness until I myself turned myself into a suspect. But the European Court of Human Rights, rightfully so, ruled that I was clearly a suspect. I was being interrogated. I was being compelled against my will to give statements implicating myself and others, and that my conviction, my subsequent conviction for both, murder and for defamation or criminal slander in Italy, so for implicating an innocent person, was unjust. And I think it's a really interesting point that I don't think I ever would have really been convicted of murder were it not for the fact that I had been coerced into giving those statements, and then subsequently convicted of criminal slander. Because I think a lot of people do not understand how an innocent person could be compelled to implicate themselves and others in a crime that they had nothing to do with. And I think that goes to show that we need a lot more transparency about what goes on in interrogation rooms. And I think, to the point of the Miranda rights question, I think that we should also have more transparency in how police are interviewing witnesses, because the line between whether or not you're a witness or a suspect is often kind of blurry. And it's very easy for you to slip from one into the other, depending upon how the police are coaching you to, or coercing you to convey your statement. And so one of the things that I really try to talk about when I'm advocating is for more transparency. We need to take this, everything that happens in an interrogation or in a police questioning happens in this black box. And we now live with these recording devices on us at all times. There's no excuse for there not to be a record of how police are communicating with both suspects and witnesses alike.
Yeah. Back in the 90s, when we were tracking and publishing about the recovered memory movement, which then became the false memory movement, false memory syndrome, where you could plant fake memories into people by just asking questions a certain way. There was then a sidebar to that of people confessing to crimes that they didn't commit. Even those, like when the police give out some tips and say, if you know anything, contact the FBI or whatever. And that people would call up and go, I'm the one who did it. And they'd get like 100 of them or something if it was a big crime.
Right.
I mean, that's just, I don't know what that is, attention seeking or mental illness or whatever. What you're talking about is something slightly different and actually more nefarious, where the police direct the interview in a certain direction, and it's done subtly enough you don't even realize you're being coached along down this path.
Yes. And the recovered memory movement played a huge part in it, because that's what my the detectives who were interrogating me were arguing with me. They said that I didn't remember the truth of what happened because it was so traumatic, and that anything that I thought I remembered about that night was really my mind imagining a false reality to cover up for those horrific memories that I truly had. And so I had to recover them. I had to remember the truth of having witnessed Meredith's murder. And, at 20 years old, I didn't have any knowledge about the recovered memory or the false memory sort of movement, but they truly believe. And I think to this day, I think there are a lot of people in law enforcement, my own prosecutor among them, who still believe in the recovered memory, philosophy, and that you can coach people to remember the truth that they cannot remember, and that they think that they're uniquely equipped to do that. When what's unfortunate is that it's all a symptom of confirmation bias. They have an idea of what they think happened in their mind, and they just need to convince the person across from them to speak to that already preconceived belief.
Yeah. When I was reading your book, I remembered an interview we did with a guy named Doug Williams. He was an ex-Oklahoma City police officer and polygraph expert turned private investigator, whatever, defense attorney, explaining how the polygraph really works. And so he told us the funniest story. Like he gets hired for the job, and then they train him on the polygraph and how it works and so on. And they go, okay, here's your first big assignment. We got an actual suspect here. Go in there and hook him up, and and do it. So he goes in there and he came back and he said, well, boss, I think he might be lying. And they go, we know he's lying, Williams. Get in there and get the confession and tell him we have his fingerprints too. And 3 eyewitnesses.
Oh my God.
Like, what? He goes, yeah, this is a confession getting machine. Oh, you just lie to the suspects? Oh, yeah. That's what he said anyway.
Yes. And lies are insidious because lies are, it's not just bullying. I think a lot of people can understand bullying, right? Like they can imagine someone hitting you until you confess, or even someone yelling at you and berating you until you confess. But the lies are where it becomes psychological coercion, where it becomes manipulation, because the lies are when you start creating a false reality around the person who is under under interrogation, and it becomes coercive because a person, like even someone who isn't like brought to believe in the false memory idea, if they're told their fingerprints are at the crime scene and that 3 people placed them at the crime scene, they're going to start to think, oh my God, I'm being framed. And the only rational thing for me to do would be to confess in the hopes that that will lead to a less harsh sentence. And like, it's absolutely a logical, common sense thing that people do. That's the calculation that's going on in their mind. But ultimately, that confession then becomes the basis upon which they then go on and build their case against them. And it's really unfair. I just, to this day, I am astonished when I go up in front of the local legislature to argue to ban police deception during interrogations. And police officers insist that they cannot do their jobs unless they lie to people. And it's not true. But ultimately, it goes to that idea that they really feel like it is them versus the rest of us, and they have to coerce and manipulate us in order to do their jobs. And it's a very scary situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we published an article by a woman, a recanter back in the 90s, who had, as an adult woman, accused her father of molesting her as a child. And she kind of walked us through the narratives of what happens in therapy. And these are therapists that think that child molestation goes on all the time and that it's subconsciously repressed because it's so traumatic and so on. So it's something like, the person's in there for whatever. They have depression or anxiety or sleep or weight or whatever. And well, do you think you might have been molested as a child? Oh, no, absolutely not. Well, I know, of course, most of us don't like to think that. But, often people have dreams where little clues come out in the dreams, or they hear something or they imagine something. Now, think about that in the next few sessions and let's talk about it. And then, like 6 months later, oh yeah, I completely remember my father, did this to me and so on. And so this is when Elizabeth Loftus did her famous Lost in a Mall experiment. She's the UC Irvine memory expert, in which she interviewed adult subjects who then were told that, amongst many things that were accurate, we talked to your parents and they told us about that time you were lost in a mall as a child. And almost all of them go, oh, yeah, sure. Of course I remember that. It was very traumatic. This is a completely made up story, right? It's never happened.
Right.
What was it? And then the person found me and he was wearing a hat. And then, and then I heard my mother's voice on the intercom and they go on and on.
Yeah. It's fast. Like I'm super familiar with her work and she's incredible. I think the really amazing thing about both that. So first of all, the fact that just the lie that oh, we talked to your parents and we know this for sure happened. So that witness that places you at the crime scene, here you go. That is the version of it. And so they immediately go, oh, that must be true. But then their mind doesn't just go, oh, it must be true. Then your mind starts to extrapolate off of that new truth, in that lie, but that is a truth in your mind. And you start to imagine things that were not even suggested to you, like the man's hat or your mom's voice over the intercom. Or I know that she did another, have you interviewed her about this subsequent thing that she did where she actually got people to, so, we can imagine that maybe, just maybe, we forgot something that happened in our childhood because lots of things happened in our childhood that we don't remember, right? So of course, maybe I just don't remember. She actually got people to confess to committing crimes in their teens.
I don't know that one.
At a time when you would not have expected to not have remembered something as having stolen from a store and been caught. Like, people have been, again, through suggestive therapeutic conversations, have been led to believe that they were caught shoplifting as a teenager, which is a very different thing than getting potentially lost as a kid. Like, so this is just to show that, like, human beings are way more suggestible than we like to think we are. And that can lead to horrendous consequences in the judicial system. And we need to stop pretending that what happens behind closed doors between law enforcement professionals who have a certain amount of authority and influence over others is this sacred object that shall not be observed. Like, it absolutely should be observed, because otherwise we're just making up false realities and putting them on trial.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to remember, as Elizabeth often talks about, the memory is not like a video camera that records what happened and then plays it back on the Cartesian theater of your mind, where the little homunculus watches it and then reports to the other part of your brain, here's what happened.
No.
Nothing like that. Yeah, it's crazy.
So conversations about that with, my prosecutor in the years since have been really, really interesting, because one of the things that I really try to talk to him about, and I talk about this a lot in the book, is like recognizing that as a law enforcement professional with a certain amount of influence over people's lives, like, he can commit harm without intending to. And I think that posing that idea to him has been a true challenge to his identity as he knows it, and has led to both interesting observations on, or like things that he's admitted to on his part, and also a really strong stubbornness to like maintain his integrity, like his sense of integrity as a person who does justice for a living, and as a life, that's his raison d'être, is justice. And what does it mean then if in the pursuit of justice you have committed an injustice? How do you reconcile with that?
Well, another one of Elizabeth's experiments was just the adjectives you use in the sentence that you're asking. You show subjects a video of a car crash, and you ask one group, how fast would you estimate the cars were traveling when they collided? The other one, when they smashed together. And the smash together has a higher estimated speed. And I don't know if attorneys know that they're doing this, but I'm sure they do, because they're trying to slant it every way they can, because their goal is to win, not to figure out what happened, right? The criminal justice system is an adversarial system based on our search for the truth. Is we're going to have two combatants go at it, and the jury, in a way, is sort of the peer review, I guess, of this evidence that's presented.
Right. And with the assumption that a jury who is impartial is going to be able to parse what parts of each story are true, instead of realizing that human beings find themselves swayed by stories, and so either choose one side or the other. I feel like, I also was under this impression that the courtroom was going to be like a laboratory where truth was boiled down out of reasonable doubt. Like, all of this stuff was going to get boiled down to truth beyond a reasonable doubt. And the jury would be able to interpret what things that were being said were factual versus not. And instead, they were being swayed by stories, because we are human beings who exist, our identities are embedded in stories. And so we understand things through the stories that are told to us, not by an objective review of the evidence, especially an objective review of evidence that we have no history or context to appreciate. Like, how is somebody who, sells groceries for a living going to appreciate a discussion about how to interpret DNA evidence? Like, that's like a high bar for someone. And you just, at a certain point, the person is going to just trust one expert or another, and they're going to trust the expert who is telling a story that they like more than the other. And that's, again, where our justice system is not functioning very well if its object is the truth.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure what the alternative is, but you'll like the story. So last year I was selected. Well, I was called for jury duty here in Santa Barbara, so I went down. Just by chance, I was the last on the list in the pool, sitting in the room from which they were selecting the jury. And so I heard every single person ahead of me because they didn't fill the 12 spots plus the 6-pack alternatives until the very end. And it was a sexual assault misdemeanor case. This is all we were told. And there's the guy with his attorney, and there's the woman with her attorney. She's accusing him of something, but we weren't told what it was. Okay, how do you feel about, being objective on this? And they just asked these super simple questions of each potential juror. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Like, it's the Me Too movement, and it's time we believe all women no matter what they say. And the judge is like, okay, you're excused.
Oh, yeah.
And it was one thing after
Well, at
another
least
like
that
that.
person was excused.
Yeah. Or, I'm a victim of sexual assault, and I just cannot be objective. Okay, thank you for, at least you're honest, right? Now, maybe some of them are just making stuff up because they don't want to serve on jury duty. But, it was scary for me. I thought, holy moly.
I do think it's unfortunate that we do not make it easy to be a juror. If you are self-employed, you are losing money. You are absolutely losing money to the system by acting as a juror. And I think that also we do not, being a juror is not really elevated to the level of importance that it should be. I think that people should get training to be jurors, and that it shouldn't just be a little 30-minute video that says, here's what reasonable doubt means.
Right.
I actually, my husband has posed this idea that being a jury member should almost be like an opportunity in your life to serve your country, and you should be rewarded for it, and you should be given, maybe you serve for 2 years as a jury member, and you become very informed, and then you're very well compensated for that service that you do to the country, and then you get to move on, as opposed to treating it like just this obnoxious burden that everyone wants to get out of. And again, even just the deliberation process, they just want to get it over with as soon as possible so they can go back to their lives, instead of carefully and really considering everything that should be taken into consideration when you're weighing whether or not someone should lose their freedom. Yeah.
I mean, because it's pretty serious, particularly on serious crimes where you could go to jail for life. Has anyone proposed something like professional jurors that are trained along the lines of what we're talking about? They take courses in critical thinking and evaluation of evidence and DNA and fingerprints and, all that kind of stuff.
The only person I've ever heard say that is my husband. And I think it's a really interesting idea to think about, because again, I think that it is a very important job that should not be given to people. I think right now the idea is that the more ignorant you are, the better of a juror you are, because you're more easily swayed. Again, because you have two sides that are just trying to convince people. So what they want on a jury is a convincible person. And I think that the more important job of a jury member is to be skeptical and not just of one side or the other, but skeptical of both sides, and to be well informed in their skepticism so they can appreciate the difference between fact and spin.
Yeah. Here's another way I think about this as a signal detection problem. Picture a 2x2 grid. So you have 4 cells, 1, 2, 3, 4. So in the first cell, you have the person that's in the courtroom is really the person who did the crime, and the jury finds him guilty. That's a hit. That's good. Over here, the person is not the person who committed the crime. The jury finds them guilty. That's very bad. That's a miss, but that's a putting somebody in prison for life kind of error to make. That's a very bad error. And then you have the person did it and they're acquitted. Okay, that's not good, because now they go on to
commit other crimes a lot of times.
Then the fourth one is none of the above. So, the problem if you're in the criminal justice system on the other side, it's like, well, we don't want to let too many people go free that are actually guilty. But, then there's the Blackstone's ratio, 10-1, better that 10 guilty people go free than that one person like you be convicted. Yeah, because I mean, your whole life has been, let me tell you what the consequences are of a wrongful conviction. It's huge. And now you work for the Innocence
Right.
Project. I don't know what the number is these days for people that have been acquitted who are on death row for murder. It's like 230 or 240 or something.
It's outrageous.
But isn't
It's
it like
really
in the
outrageous.
thousands probably of just regular crimes, not
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. Thousands and
yeah.
thousands and thousands. And innocence projects really focus on the worst cases because those are the people who are spending life in prison or are on death row for really heinous crimes that have been committed. And often those heinous crimes are committed by people who are very, very dangerous in real life and are somewhere out there probably committing more crimes. I mean, I think, one thing that I think people overlook when they look at me is they sort of assume that, oh, here's this victim of the criminal justice system. She must, not trust any cops or think that law enforcement is bullshit or whatever. And that's not true because before I ever became a victim of the criminal justice system, I was a victim of crime. Someone broke into my home and raped and murdered my roommate. And if I had been at home, I would have been raped and murdered too. So I very much appreciate the importance of going after the right person. And anything that I advocate for is not in the interest of debilitating law enforcement from doing their job. It is absolutely in the interest of going after the right people and having law enforcement use the right tools to pursue a case so that they're not wasting their resources pursuing cases that shouldn't be pursued. Like what happened to me was not necessary. They did not need to waste their resources attempting to prove an impossible case because they had just got it wrong based on their gut instinct. Like they should have gone after the person who committed this crime. And as it turned out, it was actually really easy to prove that he was guilty and to put him away. He was very quickly found guilty and incarcerated and convicted. Unfortunately, he was released early because he was never actually held accountable for the full extent of his crimes and was then, lo and behold, went on to commit further crimes. And I think the Innocence Project, all Innocence Projects, the Innocence Center is the project that I am affiliated with, are deeply concerned with that problem, with a very bad crime occurred, but we got the wrong person, which means that the right person is still out there somewhere. And we are wasting our resources when when prosecutors fight back on cases where we have proven the innocence of somebody. Like, why aren't we just acknowledging that the wrong person was put in and then put those resources towards actually discovering who committed this crime?
Right. Yeah, after OJ was acquitted, did the LAPD snap into action to go find the real killer? No, they know where the real killer was.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so funny.
Exactly.
All right, let's talk about restorative justice. You, at the end of your book, talk about reaching out to Giuliano and going there to meet with him. What were you hoping for there?
Well, you talked about how we were in this adversarial system where we were really by definition in direct opposition to each other. And I had this deep intuition that because of that adversarial system that we found ourselves in, he was just incapable of seeing who I really was. Because for him, I was the monster, I was the villain, and that was simply what I existed in his brain as. And so I decided that I wanted to approach him outside of the adversarial system and see if he was capable of recognizing that I was not the person that he thought he was prosecuting. And of course, I had, these hopes that he would recognize that and then admit that he was wrong and finally, go to the Kircher family and say, you shouldn't hate this young woman. She's innocent and all of that. Like, you have these ideas about the life that you should have and getting what you deserve. But then ultimately, I realized that I couldn't count on Giuliano figuring it out and doing the right thing in order for me to be okay. Like, I could not hinge my well-being and my place in the world on this other man. I had to be the one to make my place in the world and to do the right thing and to feel okay on my own, regardless of this person. And it led to a very interesting conversation because, sometimes we would talk about the case, but very often we would just talk about ourselves, our interests, our families. And what I discovered is that whenever Giuliano put on his prosecutor hat, he was often coming from a place of defensiveness. He was really, and he intertwined his identity as a prosecutor with the ideological institution of the Italian justice system. He wasn't just defending himself, he was defending justice as it exists in Italy. And so he became, again, that sort of adversarial mode, that automatic defensiveness. But when we talked about our lives and each other and our interests, suddenly he would slip and he would become Giuliano the man. And Giuliano the man really cared about Amanda the girl. And he really liked Amanda the girl. And he recognized that Amanda the girl was incapable of committing such a heinous crime. And he would share with me, little bits of media that we would share with, he would ask me to watch a film about a prosecutor who put an innocent person in jail. We would talk about Lord of the Rings, and he would say, oh, I'm like, you're like Eowyn, and I'm like Theoden. And anyone who's like a big nerd, like, understands the implication of that. Like, Theoden was the king who was under the control of the evil Sauron through hypnosis, and his niece is Eowyn, whose greatest fear is being in a cage. Like, there's just like all of these ways where he would say things without explicitly saying them that communicated to me a lot of stuff that was very deeply cathartic or healing for me, even if he never was capable of arising to the level of owning his mistakes and admitting he was wrong publicly. And I think that's an interesting place for me to arrive at as someone who is a victim of his harmful decision making. Like, what does it mean in restorative justice to arrive at a place of mutual respect and understanding? And ideally, that comes from a person who acknowledges their mistakes and acknowledges the harm that they have caused. Like, that's ultimately what you want from any justice system. And a restorative justice system is one in which it puts the victim in the driver's seat, and it allows the victim to pursue a sense of closure through their own acts and through their own relationship with their perpetrator. And so for me, I'm not a glass half empty kind of person. I could have looked at what Giuliano has been capable of giving me up to this point and think too little, too late. Or I could be the kind of person who can appreciate what is being offered to me and not feel limited by it, not feel like I need everything that I deserve from him in order to be who I am. I don't need him to prove myself. I don't need him to be myself. And if anything, the fact that I went out of my way to see his humanity when he did not reciprocate, did not do the same, I think says more about me than any accusation that he could have flung my way.
Is it possible he just doesn't believe it in a way, given memory and power of cognitive biases? He cannot give up the framework that he began with, and it went on for so long. He's like my friend I mentioned, there must be something. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I think there's something, I think there's absolutely something to that. I think that if he really truly believed that he was completely 100% wrong, he would feel compelled at the very least to confess that to his priest, if not to the world. I do think that he's coming from a different system than us, where prosecutors have much of a more difficult history in Italy. They were targeted by mafia and by politicians, and admitting fault as a prosecutor comes at great expense because of that fraught history. And so I do think that part of it is due to that cultural background. I think part of it is because he truly believes that he wasn't 100% wrong due to his own cognitive biases. And I think part of it is that he really wants to be my friend and to heal me, but on his own terms.
So there, your stoic philosophy that you talk about in the book of Adopting is just you can't control what his issues are. So at some point, you just have to say, I'm myself, and I'm going to reframe what happened to me and move forward.
Yep. And I am not limited by what he is capable of. I can absolutely, stand on top of this box that he tried to trap me in and share my message and share my story. And I'm a better person for it. Like, one of the things that I told him when I met with him was not just that I didn't hate him, but also that I was in a weird way grateful to him, because I would never wish this experience upon anyone. But I know that I'm a better person for having gone through it. I am much more sensitive and thoughtful about the world as a result of it. I matured very, very quickly. And I feel like because of that, I'm a much more responsible agent in the world. And I'm grateful for that.
Did you forgive him? Is that the right word?
A lot of people ask me about forgiveness, and it was never my intent to forgive him. It wasn't like a value that I needed to fulfill. What I was more interested in was understanding him. And what I discovered is that if you truly understand somebody, if you just bear witness to their naked truth, their naked, trembling truth, you cannot help but feel empathy for them. And once you feel empathy for a person, forgiveness is a natural consequence.
Nice. Yeah, I had Kevin Kelly on the show for his little book on wisdom, and one of which was, offer forgiveness. It's not for the other person; it's for you. It's a very stoic idea, and I don't like that. It's like, if they don't say they're sorry, I am not going to forgive them. It's like, it's not for them. I'm like, okay,
right?
It's really hard though.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. And a really great counterpoint in my book is my mom and my mom's side of it. And she had to witness her daughter have her life stolen from her. And as a mother myself, I talk about this in the book of like really fully realizing the embodiment of that pain and how what my mom went through was far more traumatic and far worse. And so I understand when she says, not good enough.
Yeah, right. Of course, I would have felt
but there's
exactly the same way.
There's this great Zen saying too, where it's like, you are perfect just the way you are, and you could use improvement.
Right.
So
yes.
Both can be true at once.
Yeah, that's really funny. Well, so the Kircher family, have you reached out to them to try to?
I have in the past. I am, as someone who's very trauma informed, I don't want to be pushy with them, because I understand that whether it's right or not, they associate me with this most traumatic event in their life, and they have to be ready to have a conversation with me. And if they're not, I can't make that happen. I felt more comfortable pressuring Mignini to have a conversation with me because he harmed me.
Is it your sense that they still think, well, she must have had something to do with it?
I do think that, what they have vocalized in the past is their regret that the truth about what happened to Meredith got lost. And that's absolutely a very valid, complaint. I don't think that I deserve to be held accountable for that complaint. And I am sad that they do not recognize the shared grief that we have in common, at least yet. But you never know. I really hope maybe one of them might pick up my book and, just out of curiosity, give it a read and realize that we have far more in common than they realize.
They should. But again, I guess maybe it's just hard to change your mind like that. Do you know the story, or do you know Jennifer Thompson and Ronald Conte?
Oh,
Yeah, you do.
Yes, Jennifer is a very, very good
Oh, all
friend of
right.
mine because
Okay.
she is a tremendously wonderful
Yeah.
person.
Well, their story, I mean, that's just classic, right? Of, she gets raped in college and then picks him out of a lineup and picks the wrong guy. And then for years in her, that's the new memory. There is no old memory and you flip him.
Right?
He is the guy, period. And then
Yep.
when
She believes it
and then the
100%.
DNA comes out and the the police person investigating says, we got the wrong guy. Here's the guy who did it. 100%. There's the DNA. And she's just like, but it can't be because I know who I saw.
Right.
It's like, no, you don't know
Right.
who you saw. Right. So talk about since that time, have like police presentation of lineups or how you show pictures to an eyewitness. Has any of that changed?
I mean, it all depends state
I
by
see.
state, right? So there's a lot of work being done by various innocence projects throughout the United States to try to change legislation so that it is more informed by the current science that shows how people can be suggested. And so, yes, in certain places, in certain cases, they have changed the way that they do lineups or they do, photographic lineups. They've changed the way that they do questioning. But again, some places, it's still the same old, same old. I mean, even just the fact that the polygraph is still widely
Unbelievable.
used throughout the United States to coerce confessions is a sign that our criminal justice system has not caught up to the science.
Right. If it makes you feel any better, I have a podcast guest coming on Friday. Emily Kaspar is her name. Emily
Oh,
Kaspar.
I don't know
No,
that.
she is a
Yeah.
neuroscientist in Belgium. Her book is Just Following Orders: Atrocities and the
Hmm.
Brain Science of Obedience. Okay, so she did
Mm.
in-field interviews with Cambodian and Rwandan perpetrators and victims' families of those genocides. And
Mm.
so she actually interviewed guys said, "Yeah, I did it. I killed thousands." And hey, you know what? An order is an order. This is how the system works.
Right.
The system is designed this
Yeah.
way. I was told to go do this, and so on and so on. A little bit like Giuliano, like this is the system we have. I was following, the structure. This is how we're
I was doing my
doing my
duty.
duty. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be so interested I'm assuming that she's informed also by what was going on with the
Oh
Holocaust
yeah.
and all of that. So similar. Yeah.
Yeah, that
Mm.
well, it's so interesting. Like she cites Christopher Browning's book "Ordinary Men" about the police battalion 101 that was middle-aged men who were recruited by the Nazi regime. They were too old to be in the army, but then they were assigned to follow the Wehrmacht eastward into Ukraine and
Mm.
elsewhere to kill all the Jews left in the towns after the
Ugh.
army went through. And so they weren't forced to do it where like, if you don't do it, we're going to send you off to the Auschwitz or nothing like that. But there was a lot
Mm-hmm.
of social pressure to go along with it because all the other guys are doing it. And,
Right.
and then it's sort of momentum carries, you start doing it and then you get used to it. And,
Right.
so it's talking about restorative justice. There's nothing to restore. I mean, they just like, whoa, well, this is what we did. And sort of,
Right.
were they following orders? Well, sort of. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. If you're in the military and the sergeant says, all right, today we're going to do a, 30-mile hike with a 50-pound pack, you can't say, well, I'm really not vibing it today. you know, you,
Yeah, exactly. No, you're in. I mean, have you read Professor Salk Hassan's book Dupe?
no, I don't know that one.
So there's an experiment that he talks. So it's all about false confessions and police interrogations. Really, really good. But he talks about again a question of like how do we talk about authority or obedience to authority? And there was an experiment done where it was an experiment. So it was literally not even like you're not forced to. I think you got paid $5 to take part in an experiment for a psychology class or something, where people were brought in and led to believe that they were shocking an individual when he got questions wrong. And they were
Wait, this is the Milgram's experiment.
yeah, exactly. Milgram's experiment. So he talks about Milgram's experiment and how people were led like to shock somebody to the extent that he was unconscious, potentially needed hospitalization. And they kept doing it merely by the suggestion of the authority figure in the room to keep going. And they were not going to be consequences for them walking out of the room. But like there's something about an authority figure telling you, keep going, keep doing it, that you think, well, I guess I gotta. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, I know
fascinating.
this literature pretty well because I did a replication of Milgram for a NBC Dateline episode in 2010. Chris Hansen was the
Mm,
host. And
okay.
we did 2 hours of replicating classic psych experiments, smoke coming in the room,
Mm. Oh,
everybody in the
cool.
elevators turned around facing the back wall, this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Really fun. Really fun.
Yeah.
But one of them, we built Milgram's shock box with all the little toggle switches all the way up to 450 volts.
Yeah.
And the setup was that the people are trying out for a TV show called What a Pain. You know, it's a reality show, right? So, and people will do
Uh-huh.
crazy things to be on a reality show. So potentially
Fair.
shocking somebody is actually not that bad compared to like, you're going to go on
Right.
this island in the middle of nowhere, naked and afraid. Good luck.
Yeah.
Right.
But you'll be on
You'll be on TV.
TV.
So, no problem. Get the lawyers to sign off on this. Anyway, so, but we only had one day. So we had 7 different subjects. But I wouldn't say they were just obeying blindly. They were not comfortable doing it. And then in
Mm,
the Milgram literature, there's a lot of pushback on to what extent in somebody's mind, yeah, they're obeying authority. Okay. But they're at Yale. This is by Yale University by some professor. I mean, really, am I killing somebody? Are they going to let this
they
happen?
wouldn't
Come
allow
on.
that. Yeah.
NBC
Right.
Studios, they're not going to actually like sign off on my murdering somebody.
Right.
But we don't, because they don't say that, but you think, what are they really thinking, right? But most of
Right.
our stuff, they were not comfortable at all. They're like, oh my God, one more. Do I have? And then they had a little microphone. They're like, oh, Tyler, I'm sorry. I got to do one more. Boop, boop. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And
Yeah.
then our
I mean,
it's
in
hilarious.
Milgram's experiment too, they were like,
Yeah.
do we have to? Like, no, he's clearly, should we call somebody? And they were like, no,
Yes,
continue.
you
Like,
must
people
continue.
are uncomfortable and will take orders even when they don't
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. So what does obedience really mean? I mean, you're in a social system. It's a little bit like this, the other one we did, the smoke in the room. Normally,
Mm.
if you're in a group of people and smoke starts coming through the underneath the door, people are going to get up. I mean, but
Hmm.
when nobody does anything, which our
You're like,
shills were just filling out a form to sign up for this TV show. It's like our guys would look around and they go, well, all right, no one else is doing
yep.
anything. I'm going to get back to filling out my form, because we take our cues from other people in the social environment. Should I be worried or not? Well, if no one else is,
Hmm.
well, the hell with it then.
And I don't understand why we don't recognize this, because all animals do
Right.
that. All animals do
Yeah.
that. We like,
So my take on this is that most people are not evil psychopaths, dark triad, Machiavellian, and all that. Most people are
no.
good most of the time. And it takes a bit of tweaking the system to get them to do things like this, like at Abu Ghraib or, any of the
Hmm.
atrocities or genocides. We have a pretty good handle
Right.
on all the things you got to do to go through all that.
Hmm.
I was going to shift over here to read about some of the things that the police do here. So here's you on some of your
Right.
tweets. FBI agent Steve Moore says, if they ever make an accusation against you, you are no longer a witness. You should say, I'm leaving, and then get a lawyer.
Hmm.
If they say you're not allowed to leave to see a lawyer or talk to a parent or spouse, get a piece of paper and write that down. Write down the time and ask them to sign it. If they won't sign it, fold it up in your pocket. Ooh, that's going to make them nervous, though, wouldn't that? But I worry about the police like getting pissed off at me or something.
Well, right. I mean, again, it's a very scary scenario, because as soon as you're alone in the room, you have no control over the outcome of the scenario. You do not have control of the recording device. You are not the one. So the he said, she said of it all is absolutely not in your favor. I think another thing that my friend, again, this ex-FBI agent, Steve Moore, retired FBI agent, told me that really stuck with me is that you should never, ever, no one should ever be alone with a police officer for more than an hour at a time, ever. If they talk to you for that long and they need to talk to you some more, that's when you need to ask for representation.
Interesting.
So like, again, and this counts for witnesses, anybody alike, if a police officer is talking to you for more than an hour, and this is advice that he would give his own daughter, like, do not call somebody, call for help.
Oh, you also mentioned if they ask you to repeat the story again,
Mm,
don't do it, because then you
that
might slip up and they go, oh, okay, now wait a minute. You said 9:30. Now you're saying it's 10. What else have you gotten
right.
wrong?
Exactly. And the implication being to rattle you, to make you feel like you either can't trust your own memories or to feel like you have to prove that you're telling them the truth. It's a trap. It's a trap, and they'll nitpick your reality and make you feel insane and at their mercy.
So would it not be a good idea to say, "What are you, stupid? I just told you."
Well, that I mean, respectfully,
Yes.
I would like to enjoy my right to a phone call and to an attorney. Just respectfully. These are my human rights. Thank you very much.
Do you recommend just pulling out your smartphone and turning on the little recorder? Is that allowed?
If you can't, I mean, they might take it away from you. So again, once you are on their turf and in their territory, you're often very much at their mercy. And so as much as you can avoid putting yourself in a position of being on their turf and in their territory, you are better able to manage the situation.
I like this one. The police say, "Do you know why I stopped you?" It's a trick question.
It is a trick question. Yes. They're asking you to implicate yourself. And the traffic stops are a really interesting scenario because technically they're not considered custodial, and yet custodial meaning that you are in custody, and yet you are not allowed to leave. You can't just drive away when a police officer pulls you over. So you are in custody and you are being questioned. And it's this really tricky middle ground where your rights are not really reflected in the reality of the situation.
Yeah, but there's some of these viral videos on X that, where the police pulls him over. They got the camera going, and he rolls down his window like a crack, and the cops, can I see your driver's license, registration? Why did you pull me over? They're being very hostile. It's like, whoa, this is it can't end well. And the cop is, just like, please, I just, roll down your window. Let's just talk. No, I have my rights. I have a right to, and maybe that's not such a good idea right off the bat.
I think that that police officer is also a human being. So taking the aggressive adversarial approach, again, like I advocate for setting boundaries to protect yourself and at the same time building bridges where possible. I think being respectful is always a good idea. You don't have to be aggressive and disrespectful in order to assert your rights.
Yeah. All right, I'll tell you a funny little story. So last year, I was on a group ride going south from Santa Barbara down to Ventura. There's maybe 30 of us in a Peloton going about 25, 30 miles an hour. And somebody crossed wheels, bam, half of us went down, and I really cracked my helmet. I was really banged up and feeling a little dizzy.
Ouch.
So they called, and a couple of us, so they called the emergency people, and they showed up, and the police showed up. And I'm lying there on the ground and waiting for the ambulance to come. And the cop is like, "All right, dude, okay, man, we're going to get you the help you need. So what's your name?" And I'm like, "Michael Shermer." All right, great. Now, we're going to get you what you need. Now, what's your address? So I give my address and everything. And then he's like, "All right," and then I go whisked off and everything was fine. I was okay after a day. And then 2 weeks later, I get a ticket in the mail for following too close. Yeah. This cop that was standing over me, he was writing me up as a ticket. I mean, and it's just carnage on the road. There's like broken bikes and blood. And, and I thought, to serve and protect who? It says right there on the side of the car. That really pissed me off.
This is where I would ask law enforcement, like, what do you think the point of your job is?
Right.
Like clearly everyone in that scenario figured out that maybe a little bit more space between wheels was maybe a good idea. Like, you didn't need to assert it with a ticket. Like, what is the point of that? And right now, I think police do have to prove that they're here to serve and protect us, and they keep making choices that do not suggest that.
It's a pretty minor thing. I still support the police. This is just probably one of the other guys challenged the ticket, and he got off because the judge is like, "He did what? No, we're going to erase that." I didn't want to spend the time to do it, but
well, but they sort of count on you not wanting to spend the time to do it.
I know. That's really crazy.
But how that was like the first thing that popped into his mind, like, oh, I know what to do in this scenario. Not like help pick up this guy's bike. You're like
crazy. Yeah. All right. Last big question: how lives turn out. It's one of my favorite topics. You talk about in the book all the things that happened to you, and had they not happened, you would not be the person you are today. Well, that's true by definition, I guess, for everybody. In your case,
Yep.
much worse than most of us. So I guess you could say you're all the tougher for it, or more resilient, or something like that.
It also depends on how you look
Yeah.
at it, because I look at it as also that some people can look at me and think, wow, what an unlucky person you are. And I can look at it and think, well, also what a lucky person I am. I did not get murdered that night. I know lots of people who have spent a lot longer in prison than I have. I've had the opportunity to meet somebody in my life who supports me and is able to carry the baggage that I carry alongside me. I'm married. I have 2 beautiful children. I have a career in advocacy work, and I feel really good about that. And so I also feel like I'm very incredibly lucky in so many ways.
Well, you mentioned there, I just want years ago, I just want my old life back where I'm a college co-ed. Well, that life is gone, and maybe,
Long
long gone.
gone.
But you wouldn't have it any other way because you don't have any choice in the matter. So I guess this is your stoic, whatever happens to you, that's just the way it goes. Man, it could have been worse, could have been better, but that's what I
Yep.
have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I even spoke a little bit about that when I was just at the Innocence Network conference, and I was awarded the Impact Award. I was the very lucky recipient this year, and the Impact Award being for a wrongly convicted person who has gone on to have a positive impact. And the thing that I told them was that Buddhist parable of the farmer who, yeah, are you familiar with that Buddhist parable? Oh, okay. So there's a farmer who one day his horse runs away, gets out of the paddock and runs away. And all of his neighbors say, what bad luck. And the farmer says, maybe. And the next day the horse returns with 3 wild horses. And all of his neighbors say, wow, what amazing luck. And he says, maybe. And then his son the next day is training one of the wild horses and falls down and breaks his leg. And his neighbors say, what bad luck. And the farmer says, maybe. And then the next day, the army comes through town and recruits all the young men into the army, except for the farmer's son, who's laid out with a broken leg. And all the neighbors say, what good luck. And he says, maybe. And so what I can say from that is things happen to us in life and they appear one way or another. And, that's not to diminish the very explicit tragedies that exist in this world. Like, they are tragedies. I never should have gone to prison for a crime I didn't commit. Meredith never should have been murdered by Rudy Gaudet. But ultimately, we don't know what the outcome is going to be in our lives. And I got to stand in front of a large group of my peers and who I consider family members now and say, I'm just so grateful to be here. And I would not have been here were it not for what I had gone through. So stick around to figure out how it's going to turn out and just try to have a say. Try to have a say in how it turns out.
Well, you may not know what it all means for another 35 years, but you're in your mid-30s, so you double that. And looking back, it may have different meanings.
Sure.
After maybe your kids are growing and they have kids and you're a grandma, and then something happens and you go, oh, okay, well, now this thing that happened to me when I was 20, now that has different meaning now.
Now it can have meaning for you too. Yeah, exactly.
That's wild. Well,
100%.
I was going to read your benediction because it's so beautiful, but I think I won't. I think I'll tell people, get the book. And when you read the benediction, it is so moving. It is so beautiful. And they have the music come up with it as you're reading it. It's just, wow. May you be free.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
May you be free. And you are. There it is, free. My search for meaning. You found it. Way to go. All right, Amanda. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
All right. Thanks. Take care.